Hello, and welcome to another episode of the William Branham Historical Research Podcast. I'm your host, John Collins, the author and founder of William Branham Historical Research at william-branham.org, and with me I have my co-host and friend, Jed Hartley, son of a prophet and former member of the International House of Prayer. Jed, it's good to be back, and today we have a bit of overlap. I don't know if you've been catching it or not, but almost every single time I talk to Bob, he wants to go towards discussing what made all of this mess. That's his big theme, and we've been hitting narcissism pretty hard. I don't know in the relationship of when this is recording and his is recording, which will come out first, but we've got a couple episodes from him on narcissism, and it's a really good topic because I don't think people recognize whenever the term is used, it's used so loosely in today's world that you can brand somebody a narcissist who isn't a narcissist because they do something that you don't like.
Right.
But there are true narcissists that are wreaking havoc in church and work and everywhere, even in leadership. I read in Bob's book, and I knew this before, but he was talking about how some of the most respected leaders in world history have been narcissists because that's what motivates them and that's their ambition. And some of them turn out to be good leadership, although they have this personality disorder, which is horrific. So there's some interesting things to talk to there. But as it relates to the church world, a narcissist really has no place behind a pulpit, yet we've created this world where that seems to be what it attracts.
Yeah. I can't remember if I've ever given this metaphor to you before, but I very much believe that, my dad was diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder, and I do think that the term is used by a lot of people and it became like a pop psychology term, which I understand, like people, I get that it makes sense, but people think of it as this, like, someone who's just self-obsessed. And it's like, a lot of people are self-obsessed. A lot of people are selfish. A lot of people have, like, that measure of self-focus and sort of myopic views of themselves. But when describing my dad, and I apologize if I've done this before, but, if I'm repeating myself, but I think that there's the metaphor that I've sort of latched onto is imagine you're in a world where you run afoul of some magician or wizard and he curses you so that your entire existence and your life is dependent on some person other than yourself always thinking about you or always like noticing you. Have I given this metaphor before with you? Okay, great. Imagine you are cursed so that your very existence is dependent on someone else thinking about you or having noticing you in some way. And think about how you would then live your life and how you would bluster through all of life just attempting to grab attention of the people who are around you and making sure that you fix yourself in the sort of mind's eye of anyone who interacts with you, whether or not people like you or whether or not people think positively with you is like secondary to whether they're just thinking about you at all. And I think that this is a very good description of like if you can put yourself in that mentality, you have a little bit of an idea of like what I think was going on and still goes on in the mind of Bob Hartley is that like he would go into situations and go into just like we would be at coffee shops and he would walk in and he would start making jokes to everyone, or he would start preaching the gospel to people, but like in a very weird way, or he would prophesy to someone, or he would, make conversation with everyone around him, which like to some extent that was like a fun, exciting thing if you didn't know him very well and you didn't have to like travel with him and live with him. It was just like he was a very interesting and engaging person because he had what seemed to be like zero shame. But where it became really toxic, and where I think that this is similar, like not all narcissistic personality people manifest their narcissism in the same way, but I've seen some parallels of this with a lot of, specifically NAR leaders, is they would, or there's just this need to be at the center of every conversation, a need to be at the center of like specifically prophetic conversations, and to like wrestle for different mantles and different authorities so that they could be the person that was being elevated in this grand story. And like with my dad, like they're just, no story could be told without his involvement. Like he had to be at the center of everything that was happening and everything that was being talked about. And it required everyone else to buy into the same story. Everyone else around him had to preach the same message, had to be echoing the same narratives that he was saying himself. And it was, obviously, as a child growing up with that, that's absolutely exhausting. Like you can't live and have your own independent life. But beyond it too, like it was truly dysfunctional. And I think that's what people don't necessarily always realize too, is like, it was problematic to him too. Like he would get in his own way. He wouldn't have the patience to allow his story to be told in the right way. Like he had to jump the gun on everything that he was doing, and had to insert himself into conversations that just like weren't about him. And so like I can totally see how people look at like these grand leaders and we're like, they probably had narcissism. And it's like the few instances where narcissism actually like works for these people, where it gets them in places of power and authority. But most people who have narcissistic personality disorder like are just destroying their own lives. They're their own worst enemy. And that certainly was the case with my dad. And I think that I don't think that people have, like, unless you've lived with someone who truly has narcissistic personality disorder, where like every moment of the day, you're like, why are you even doing this? This doesn't even benefit you. People aren't thinking of you more positively. You're just like causing chaos for the sake of chaos. I think that's a hard thing to wrap your head around.
I don't know that I've talked too deeply about this. We've mentioned narcissism and narcissists because if you have a central figure of a cult, usually they're a narcissist. But there's one aspect as it relates to narcissism that is very interesting in the Christian world. Whenever you can go online, you can find these, anybody can look them up, find the top 10 signs of a narcissist, or 15, there's different lists out there. And they'll give you the lists, and one of the commonalities between all narcissists, most of them lack empathy. You can be different points on the scale of narcissism, but most of them are going to lack empathy, because that's one of the characteristic traits. But in the form of a Christian leader narcissist, this gets very interesting, because if you're in a high control group and your leader is a narcissist and you escape, many times the people who escape have trouble labeling their central figure that they left as lacking empathy, because he's giving. This is a charitable person. He's giving to the poor, et cetera, and he's a narcissist. They'll usually say this. But what many people don't understand when they leave, is that what looks like empathy sometimes is also narcissism, because there are people who give so that people will recognize their great power of giving. I give better than anybody else can give, that kind of thing, right? So they will give sometimes just to have their name on a list of giving. They'll give so that whenever, not many of them are very open with their financials, but those that print the papers, they can look on the financials and say, oh, wow, he's a giver. This must be a great guy. But it can still be a trait of narcissism where it gets very, very difficult when you're escaping one of these high demand groups or cults, is that their lack of empathy manifests itself in the way in which they betray the people who they're leading. They will do whatever they can to just rip somebody up and even cause divisions among their own crowd so that they can rise above the division and show themselves as a hero to the division. And they have no empathy whatsoever on their audience. And the deeper you go with that, we could do probably a whole podcast on just the lack of empathy. But it's one of the characteristic traits that if you're in a leadership like this and you recognize that somebody's doing this, it's best to get out.
Absolutely. And the fact that it's so commonplace I've met probably 5 or 6 people who I'm like, these are true narcissists in my life. And 4 out of the 6 of them were all religious leaders, include my dad and Mike Bickle and others. Well, and actually, I wouldn't even put Mike Bickle in that because I didn't see that firsthand enough. But I think that I think that others who have seen his stuff, I definitely saw some of the traits of it, sort of in the stories about him and kind of secondhand. But it just is. It's amazing that the people who are supposed to be our religious leaders who are closest to God, who, in the IHOP and Bethel world, and they're literally the people who are talking with God, are the individuals who truly do not have empathy or concern for other individuals' lives. It is the only way in which you can try to appeal to the better sense of these individuals is that you have to package whatever you're trying to get them to care about. You have to package it into their own identity. So this is something that I had to do with my dad all the time, is that I would talk with him about is this the person that you want to be? And sometimes I would see some genuine reflection in him where he would be like, no, this is not who God's calling me to be. I'm not supposed to be my dad was extremely cruel to a lot of his staff, and where he would just berate them. They would come in, someone did something wrong, and usually it was his fault that things weren't happening the way that he wanted to because he was disorganized, and he would not give people clear objectives or goals or something like that. He would just kind of talk about his whims of for I think 5 years he kept always talking about a database. He was always like, oh, we need to make sure that the database is put together. And I still don't even know what the database was. He had email lists and stuff like that, but I don't even know if he knew. He wanted to make sure that he had all of the information. And it makes sense when he's a prophetic, evangelist who is trying to prophesy to all different people, and he's cheating and using, phone numbers that he's gotten offline and all of this information. I think probably what he was wanting is a database so that he could go prophesy to anywhere and anyone, and he could look up their name and have all their information about them. But because he wasn't ever explicitly telling people that's what he was doing, he just would be like, oh, we got to have a database so that I can get in contact with these people. And it's well, all your friends are already in your phone. I don't know what you're talking about. You have those emails, but it was this constant thing where he was he would get mad at me or get mad at his staff members that he was working for that he would kind of give them the vision of what he wanted, and then they would try to do it, and then they would come back and be like, okay, I have this master list of all of these things. And he was like, that's not what I asked you for, and this is not what you were doing. And he would attack like their very like identity as people. It wasn't like, man, you didn't do this. It was like, because he would pick people who were in vulnerable states. So it was a lot of conversations about like, you know, he would get on them for like addiction or spiritual, like not being dedicated enough to God, or for being disorganized, or, you know, this just like pull at the character traits of these people who attempted to do something for him that he never actually explained in detail. And anyway, all this to say is that like the only way that I could get him to feel empathy for the people that he was abusing. Well, I couldn't get him to feel empathy for the people that he was abusing, or even for me or my sisters, like his very children. It would have to be like, is this the father that you want to be? Or do you want to be a father who's like yelling at his children? Do you want to be a boss who's like yelling at his staff members? Do you want to be known for like always getting angry at your staff? And I wouldn't, of course, I couldn't say it even at that extreme. It would be like, you'd have to say the positive. Don't you want to be known as a father who is kind to his children? Don't you want to be known as a leader who led people with kindness and compassion? And that's where he would be like, yes, I do. And so to talk with him and to engage with him, I had to drop all notions of empathy. Like if I was talking with you or a friend of mine, and I was like upset because you had yelled at me during the, I would have been like, hey, that hurt my feelings. That hurt, like I would talk about me. I would talk about, or I would talk about whoever was hurt. I would talk about the person that they did the wrong to. Like, you hurt this individual, that's wrong. But you can't talk to a narcissist about the effect that they had on people. You have to talk about them. And then what happens is, when you have ministries that revolve around the narcissist, is that everyone learns, whether they're doing this consciously or not, they learn to do the same thing. They learn to talk about the narcissist and to make everything about them. And you have then an entire, like the ecosystem of the ministry starts reflecting the ego and narcissism of the person leading the ministry. This is 100% that what happened at IHOP, is that you had many Mike Bickles who had this sort of narcissistic traits themselves, but then they would also sort of lead into the narcissism of Mike Bickles. So you would talk with someone and they would kind of be like, well, it always kind of led back to Mike. It always led back to the cult leader or whoever. And it was, but then one of the funny things with this is that when they're in power and when they're in leadership, they kind of can build an ecosystem around their ego. They can kind of have these worlds around them. But then what happens when they don't have that ecosystem around them? What happens when they're going in and they don't have, a son to be like talking to them about how, is this really the man that you want to be? What happens when it's just they're the staff members, or they're the individuals who are trying to work for someone else, and they have to like, it just doesn't, it doesn't work all the time. You go into some place and you have this sort of like cruel way that you treat people and this massive ego, and people are going to be like, what the hell are you doing? It just doesn't work. And I saw that happen all the time too.
Yeah, and it's that ecosystem that I really want to drive towards. But before we go there, You
Yeah.
mentioned the database, and
Yeah.
I want to talk to that because I don't think you and we were close
Yeah.
enough to the upper tiers. We understand this. And once you escape, you kind of know how all this works, right? But to the
Yeah.
rank and file members, they have no idea. Like I get into interesting conversations with my wife because she and her family don't have any scoundrels in them. And so whenever I talk about things that people might do that are underhanded, she's like blown away. She can't imagine that somebody would even think like this.
Yeah.
I unfortunately came from a long line of people who think like this. I'm not going to go much further than that, but I can think like these people, and that helps me in my research because half the time I don't know that they actually did something. But I will suspect, I would put myself in their shoes. If I was a villain and I was given this exact scenario, what would I do? And I would go forward with it. But the database thing, not many people think through this. So picture you're in an age where there is no technology. And you have this divine healing game that you're playing the crowds with, which is raking in large sums of money. And I have evidence. You can go look it up. It's in the newspapers. These guys made a killing off of this divine healing gig. So they go in and they've got a crowd of people and they're going from town to town to town, targeting rural areas usually. Mm-hmm. After this grew, it obviously went into big cities, but they all start out with rural areas. They have men working with them. And there is no database. There is no electronics. You don't have a cell phone or a tablet. But you have people who are in on the game who are praying, showing themselves to be humble with people who are sick and afflicted. They're not the divine healer, but they're working with him. And so they're praying with brother so-and-so for his back, or they're in a group of people saying, oh, look, we just brought our mother. She's suffering and she just came from somewhere. I'm so glad the healer's here. Well, this guy is standing there and he's in the game, right? All these guys are in the game. The people themselves become the database in those old gimmicks, right?
Right.
Now take this a step further. Whenever the post-World War II healing revival movement exploded, the guys who were at the top realized the volume of money that can flow through these things, and it needed a corporate strategy. And if you understand that what they were doing was a crime, even though it's in this gray area because it's religion, it became organized crime. So Gordon Lindsay, who later became the head of Christ for the Nations, he works with William Branham, and they create this magazine, Voice of Healing.
Yeah.
And everybody gets in on the game. You want to be a healer? Join our movement. Get in our magazine. We will get subscriptions to people. And there were actually advertisements. I don't know if I can find one for this podcast. I'll try, but you can go to my website and you can type in Voice of Healing and you can read through them. You can see these things. But they would send, we would like for you to gift a subscription to somebody. Are they sick too? Send us their name and address and their condition. Give me your name, your address. We want your testimonies. Right. We want all of. So they're collecting. They actually had a database, but it was a paper database from all the mail that was coming in. Yeah. So you can route that to. I'm not saying they did. I wasn't there, but knowing how these con artists think, if I've got a stack of papers for a specific region, and I've got a faith healer going to that region, and I can say with probably 90% accuracy that if they wrote into my magazine and I'm sending one of the people from my magazine to their city, most likely these people who wrote in are going to come to this meeting, and I've got exactly what's wrong with them, their names, their addresses. All you've got to do is identify a human being in the meeting with the piece of paper that they sent in the mail. And that's a database. That's how this. Honestly, I think if I were to give an opinion, I'd say that's how they did a majority of it, not all. But that's just one of many cons that you can do as a con artist. So when you have this elaborate scheme, this is a big deal. These guys, you have to have a level of narcissism to remove the empathy from the people who are actually literally suffering so that you can take their money away from them.
Right. And, oh man. I can't believe I didn't put this together before. Of like, it makes so much sense too, because like the era that my dad became launched his sort of prophetic ministry was before the internet age. I mean, it was starting, it was kind of 90s, 2000s, 2010s. So, I mean, obviously, internet was very up and running by the 2010s, but like, um, he didn't build his ministry off of doing what like Sean Bowles does now, where it's get the name, Google the name, and it's like the internet is your database. Like you don't have to have your Rolodex of information because like the internet has that for you. All you have to do is have the name and like maybe one or two associations to like know that you got the right person. Um, but with my dad, I think I've said this to you before, but like I remember when I was probably 6 or 7. I mean, maybe I was a little bit older, but I remember we went to a ministry, like went to a church to minister, and I was with him. And back in the day, they used to have the paper um, church. What is it called? Church registry, where it had the information of the people on in the church, because that back in the day, that's like if you wanted to contact someone in the church, you just grab the little pamphlet and it has the names and it has their phone numbers, and I don't think it had addresses, but I think it just kind of had the names and the names and the phone numbers of the people who were like church regulars. And my dad had me like go and sneak and grab one of those pamphlets and bring it back to him. And I like remember doing that. And I remember it being fun. And I didn't realize why I was like sneaking. And I don't even know if he told me to sneak, but I knew internally, I picked up on something that I was like, I was supposed to grab that and bring it back to him. And I mean that picture is like a very like old school picture of a con artist of like having their son like run and get information and bring it back to them. And anyway, so what my dad would do, and for anyone who knew my dad, or knows him, I'm sure he still does this, but he would have like, I mean, he had hundreds of three-ring notebook binders, and he would have all of these printouts that he would do, and then he would write in them, and he would just continually write and write and write and write. And like, so say we were going to um, go minister at a church, we would go and stay with a host family, and he would bring out one of those notebooks, and he would already have a list of names that he had procured somehow, either from the pastor or for someone else. And he would talk to people who are in the church, and he would ask the people information about like, oh, okay, I have this name, John Collins, tell me about him and his boat, or something like that, and get specific information. And then he would just write it down on paper. But like, he was very disorganized, so he would lose a lot of his papers and he would lose a lot of his writing. And so I now see it totally makes sense, because I'm telling you, John, I like until today, I never really put it together, but because it was like a 5-year thing where every single month he would be talking about how he needs his database. He needs his database. And everyone was like, well, I don't know what you're talking about. We have like a list of emails. And if you want, because that was the sort of thing of like, okay, well, if you want to sell your product, because that was what he always was talking about, is like, we need to be able to like sell our product. And it's like, well, the emails are sufficient for it. Like, if you have the name and the email, that's totally sufficient for it. And it's like, people will unsubscribe or whatever. But like, I mean, he probably had something like 10,000 names, if not more, like 15, 20,000 names on an email list. And it was like, there you go, there's your database. And people would work on having like more organized databases where like, oh, we could see, here's the engagement that people were clicking on and versus not. Here are your people that you really want to sell to, and here are people who don't. But it wasn't enough, because he needed what church they were affiliated with. He needed their phone numbers. He needed their address. Like, he needed more information. I can't believe I didn't put this together. But like, and it was just like really confusing, because you would have these people, like, he was saying that he wanted it for the purpose of selling his product. And like, there were people who were experienced in selling product who did a good job of establishing a database and giving it to him. And he would be so angry and upset with them because they didn't give him what he wanted. And now it makes total sense, because what he wanted is, he needed that Rolodex, that if he was to go and minister to places, he needed to be able to have that sort of like all of the information that he had collected. And what he probably wanted is people to go through his notebooks and take his writing that he wrote about all of these specific individuals and put it in a digitized format and organize it for him, so that like next time he goes and ministers at the church in Oregon that he once went there, he now has all of the hard work that he already did, because as he got older, his memory was worse and he couldn't remember these people and what names were associated with what. And man, it's blowing my mind that like, that makes so much sense that that's what he was going for. And that was also the prophets before him, especially oh shoot, what's his name? Paul Cain. Paul Cain had a Rolodex. Like, he had physical copies of people's information. And I totally understand that. My dad was trying to sort of emulate that, of having like all of the physical papers that he had used throughout his entire life. He wanted that sort of consolidated and digitized, but he couldn't just outright say it, because it was fraud. And he couldn't just tell people, hey, help me with my con. He had to keep up the illusion of it. I don't think he ever once out loud said anything that would have recognized the con. Like, I don't think he ever described any of his con artist behaviors or anything like that, because like, it wasn't even just about not getting caught. He just could not. He would do actions that he couldn't verbalize himself, because like, he didn't want to be that person. He didn't want to be a con artist. And so if he spoke it out loud, it sometimes, it suddenly becomes real. But man, that's blowing my mind. I can't believe. I want to like call my sisters right now and be like, this is what it was about. And they would be like, oh, wow, yeah. Or maybe they would be like, duh, I can't believe you didn't figure that out already. But yeah, so many arguments were about that database. And just, he fired probably half a dozen people because they wouldn't get the database for him. And he always would. He would always send them to me. Oh man, and this makes sense too. Sorry, John. This is probably terrible podcasting, but this is just me figuring out my own father's procedures. But he would send them to me a lot of times and would be like, Jed, help these individuals get the database. And I was always like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't know how I can help you. And it makes sense because like, he knew out of everyone, I was the one who like understood his grift the best. And like, because I had like confronted him about it in the past, but like also helped him in the past with certain stuff. I mean, when I was really young. So he probably was like, if anyone could kind of like figure it out, it would be Jed. And like, that's probably true. I, of course, did not figure it out, and I did not help those people, and they all got fired.
Have you ever wondered how the Pentecostal movement started, or how the progression of modern Pentecostalism transitioned through the latter rain, charismatic, and other fringe movements into the new Apostolic Reformation? You can learn this and more on William Branham Historical Research's website, william-branham.org. On the books page of the website, you can find the compiled research of John Collins, Charles Paisley, Stephen Montgomery, John McKinnon, and others, with links to the paper, audio, and digital versions of each book. You can also find resources and documentation on various people and topics related to those movements. If you want to contribute to the cause, you can support the podcast by clicking the Contribute button at the top. And as always, be sure to like and subscribe to the audio or video version that you're listening to or watching. On behalf of William Branham Historical Research, we want to thank you for your support. Not everybody thinks like a con artist. I unfortunately have the gene because it runs through the family. I'll just say it like that.
Yeah.
And sadly, I would make a good cult leader if I was just a little bit evil, but I don't have enough evil in me to do it. But people who don't have this, people who, and especially in a religious setting, you go and you shut off all your critical thinking when you're in a church. You have no idea that the guy is conning you, and so you don't even want to believe that he is, even if you suspect it. So you turn off your critical thinking, and you don't pick up on the things. But then when somebody escapes after having been conned, like I get countless emails, how did William Branham do this in the Healing Revival? How did he know their names and their addresses and their whatever it was, you know? And they're looking for a one-size-fits-all answer. But that's not how con artists work, man. If he's in one building and there's a certain setup or scenario, he's going to apply his con to that building. Yeah. If he's in a city, it could be regional, whatever it is. They're going to take the con and make it fit the situation. And I came across a book. I mentioned this in the podcast with Bob, but there was James Randi, who was a magician. He discovered that all these faith healers were just conning the people. And he devoted his life to exposing the con artists, which was kind of funny. And I bought his book, The Faith Healers. And he goes through, he says, I was a magician. Here's how they did this. Here's how they did this other thing. Here, and he's walking you through, and I'm reading it like, oh my gosh, man, why didn't I pick up on that? We're in a modern age. I'm smart enough to figure this out, but I had shut off all critical thinking. But his book kind of exposed it. He exposed Branham, among others. And he walks you through from the ancient, well, not ancient, but from the early faith revival leaders that he was in contact with up until the modern age when they're using the electronics. And so he's taking you there. What it made me do is it made me pick up on things. Like, so I mentioned the people who were working the crowds. So these men who are, legitimately praying with the people. Yes, we'll pray with you and we'll give you a prayer card so you can go up and see the healer. Well, then the healer, William Branham, would say the oddest things. You in the red sweater with the pink polka dot top. You with the yellow sweater with the odd looking, you with this. He is literally using visual cues. But that was just one of many techniques. There were several techniques. James Randi went through these techniques. But he took you all the way up to, I think it was Peter Popoff that had the little device in his ear, right? That book was published before the late 90s and the early 2000s. So there was a technology shift that, see, I'm a software guy and I have the unfortunate gene. So I understand that all you have to do is pay some developers. The moment in which flat screens technology came out, you can even devise pulpits that had a flat screen in it back then. And speech to text technology, I want to say it came out, maybe it was the early 90s, maybe mid 90s, but there came a point in time in which you could talk into a microphone, and the microphones were only about the size of your thumb. Talk into a microphone, it could go into a computer that could be mounted anywhere in the pulpit, and as you talk, your talking became the typing. So picture in a Google search, I'm talking, well, my words go in there, and then I hit enter. In today's world, we have these AI tools and Siri on your iPhone and all of these. People understand how this technology works now. Back in the 90s, man, late 90s, early 2000s, nobody knew how that worked. They didn't even know you could do it. Take it a step further. probably about, I want to say it was after the flat screens came out. It might have been 5 years. But software developers realized the power of this, and they were building the early prototypes of what would become Siri. And it was some really cool technology. I wish I could remember the name of the software, but you could install these softwares. So if you had a phone call, for example, or you had a business meeting and you started talking and the other person's talking too, both feeds went into the microphone. Both feeds started to access a database, and it would pull up visual cues as they're talking so you could understand better what they were saying.
Yeah.
If you take a devious mind minister who has the funding to pay for a development team, who can take that technology and apply it to a database of people that he has in his congregation, think of that. You've got a flat screen monitor on your pulpit, and I'm not saying anybody did this, right? I'm just saying that as a con artist, these are the type of things that you can do. But you can talk, and you can literally have it such that as you and they are talking, you can pop up visual cues on your database and see it. So that technology hit probably 2000s. I'm not aware of any single faith healer that did that. But where I'm headed with this is now that we have AI, we have all of these other tools, the power to take over the minds of people and hijack them with these kind of tricks now is so far amplified and undetectable because now everybody has the same technology. Who's to say he's not setting his tablet on the, right there on the pulpit, and he's preaching from the Bible and his notes are in his tablet. Well, in that same tablet, you can have multitasking and you can have a whole array of things that are your database. People have no idea that he's doing it because he's reading the Bible from that same tablet.
Yeah, or don't do the tablet, like have the earpiece, because like the tablet is, I really think that it's good, obviously, that you and I and others are talking about these things now, because like in 10, 20, 30 years, it might be really hard to catch people. Like if you and I wanted to create a prophet, and I mean, it'd be like it picks somebody, and we like train them to be a prophet. Like we could easily do it in a way where they wouldn't be recognized because, you can make it more of a magic show, just like magic. If you go to, I live in, Los Angeles, and I go to the magic shows here, and I'm like, I legitimately have no idea how people do it because they get really good, and they aren't hiding what they are to themselves. This is another thing that, like, my dad's narcissism was his own worst enemy. Is like he never was able to just like outright tell people what he wanted in his database because he was not able to like come to terms with that's who he was. It's like if I play chess and I'm pretty good at chess, but like I'm not anywhere the level of like being, some of the best in the world and grandmaster stuff. But if I like, there's technology now where like the computer is far better than anybody, these like chess bots are far better than Magnus Carlsen or any of the best like chess players in the world. And it would be like if I started cheating and using that, had an earpiece or something like that. But yet I couldn't even come to terms with the fact that I was cheating. So like in my own head, I still thought I was a brilliant chess player, even though I was getting all the moves from here. It just like, that's the sort of narcissism of believing you're so grand. And that's definitely what my dad was doing is he was cheating. He had the it wasn't an earpiece, but he had all of these like really shady ways that he was getting the information, but he still believed that he was this grand prophet. And I think that that's what kept him from being actually very good at it, because he could have had a database. He was a good performer. He could have gotten people to really believe him, and he could have had information like what he did better than what these Sean Bowles and Chris Reed don't do is like he didn't have technology. And that's like a huge red flag for people. Like if you see iPads, people are going to be like, this isn't, something's up here. But if you just have paper Or if you have, your Bible and you have it scrawled in the little notes in your Bible, that's people won't know and it'll be convincing. And I think, now, like, if you set me on like finding out a bunch of information and filling out the Rolodex, I could do it because like there's so much information online that people don't even realize that they have information online. And as long as you're able to violate ethics, like there's so much technology is like omnipresent. We literally have access to a near omnipresent God. It's not God, it's omniscient, not omnipresent. I mean, it's kind of omnipresent too, but an omniscient God that just knows everything about us. And it's not God in the heavens that we're talking to. It's ChatGPT, and it's just internet in general, and like finding out so much of people's lives are on the internet and they don't even realize it. And so I think that it's so important that we're talking and identifying all of the tactics that they're doing now, because if the group decides, if it continues to evolve, it's going to be a lot harder to pick it out in the next 10, 20 years.
It's kind of funny because I've toyed with ChatGPT a little bit, some of these different AI tools in the technology I do. And it's funny because many of the ministers who are in the research that I have on my pages have 0% knowledge of what is true theology. But now they've got tools like ChatGPT that can write their sermons for them.
Right.
And I'm not saying it produces the perfect theology, but it's far better than what they had before.
Right.
So like you said, it's going to make it, eventually it'll be very difficult to detect people who are conning you. But one of the other things you mentioned, so technology, there are people who are using the technology and they're very, very obvious that's a con. But there are body hacks and there are body things that you're born with that can make it even more possible. I think this is common knowledge, so I'm going to say this with caution for anybody who's taking what I say verbatim and quoting me. I have heard from multiple sources that Paul Cain was using stacks of phone books. And this is a guy who's doing the I know your name and address kind of gimmick, right, in his faith healing. I've heard from multiple people, and I believe somewhere I read it online, but I've looked and I can't find it again. But if that's true, if what the people have told me is true, and some of them were in his inner circle, that he had these stacks of phone books, and before he'd go into a revival convention, he would get phone books from the city, and they caught him reading them basically, and ask him, why are you doing this? And I think the quote was something to the effect that God has given me the gift, but sometimes you need a little bit of help with your gift. Hamburger helper, something like this, right? So what this tells me, knowing that, because if I were to give you a stack of phone books, would that help you? You have to have a photographic memory for that to work. So what it tells me is that one of the cons by one or more of the people, Paul Cain must have been one, had a photographic memory. And so this is a way you can con people. If you have this gift and they don't, you have an edge. But here's an interesting part as it relates to IHOP KC. Whenever I learned that was a possibility, I started studying Branham's sermons heavily on techniques for memorization. So the colors is a technique, right? Here's a person who's got a polka dot sweater and it looks odd, whatever it is. But there are other techniques as well. One of them to improve your memory is fasting. If you fast, and when you're in the fast, your memory is, I've experienced, I've done fasting. I lost, I think I told you this, I lost 45 pounds in 45 days fasting. All of your senses are heightened. Your memory is better during the fast. Even though your body's weak from the fasting, I had more energy. I was able to work out harder during my fast. It was kind of crazy. If it didn't kill me, if I did it long term, it probably would help me. But it did help my memory. And then when I went off of the fast and started just eating regularly, my memory was depleted. So during the fast. And so I started looking when I recognized this. William Branham says, now every time before I go into a healing revival series, I'll do a fast for, I think he said 7 days, something like this. And I'm starting to piece it together. And what I really found odd is as he traveled from town to town, he only had like 5 sermons, and he would just repeat the 5 over and over again.
Right.
Not everything that he had was copied from somebody else, basically. But he would say things, and then he would pretend not to remember, and he would have the audience help him, with his memory. And then he would go to the next city for the same exact subject, same topic, and say, I can't remember, forget the same thing, have the audience help him. This is a con. If the audience is helping you, you're training them to believe that I can't remember anything.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to do this faith healing gimmick where I'm going to tell you your names, addresses, phone numbers, whatever.
Yeah. So
there's many different cons, a variety of cons, but the body hacking thing it's real. People can do that. I can't do it, but my wife knows. She was a school teacher, so she knows these memorization techniques. You can do little mind memory mapping things. She has the name for it. I don't. But people can do this, and some people are really, really good at it. I'm not. I have to take notes everywhere I go. But that's one of the techniques. And I think I've listed 10 techniques at this point, but there's probably 1,000 different techniques that these guys use.
Yeah. Well, yeah, no, I mean, everything that you're saying, that's exactly what my dad would do. I mean, my dad had a really incredible memory for numbers. Like, he could remember phone numbers super well, and he would like show off this in non-prophetic context. Like, he would pick, if you have a 4-digit number, 1742 or something, he would try to associate that with biblical passages like the Psalm 1742, man. And he would read that passage, and it makes it way easier to remember because it's about a subject, but it's also way easier to, the performance of it feels way more impactful because it doesn't feel like you're just straight reading numbers to it. There's like way more of an art to it. So the body hacking, just every way that you can use any advantage to make it more powerful. They really, I mean, my dad learned from several other individuals, including Paul Kane and others, to like how to do these things, and was good at it. Like, that was his job. His job was to find every little edge to make his message work. And early, just to go back to something that you were saying at the beginning, having ministers who like use ChatGPT to make their nonsense words make sense, is like, obviously people are going to be doing that. But something that was really eerie that happened is a few days ago, or maybe like a week ago, my dad released a podcast, and it was the first attempt to like do public ministry that he's done since I spoke out against him, and since like he's been banned from Bethel and IHOP. And so he released this podcast, and I listened to it, and I'm like, who are these people talking? It was like a young, 20s, 30s something male and female talking about the Yellow House, and talking about, well, Bob Hartley had this prophetic dream, and it's really powerful, da 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 da. And I'm listening to it, and I'm like, who are these people? Like, who did he rope into his world? And it took me like 3 or 4 minutes to be like, oh, this is AI. Like, this is a chat. And I was shocked that I got, the cadence of it. Like, they would be like, well, and, very slow in the sort of way they delivered things. And then they would talk over each other too. And I was like, it was just a really, really good ChatGPT, or I mean AI, thing, and it was super, super eerie. It didn't make any sense. The sentences did, but the content didn't. Like, the content was just, you know, it's like if you had an AI explain your dream, and you had talked into the recording at 1 a.m. when you're like half asleep, and then ChatGPT was like trying to make that something real. It's just like, yeah, they're using proper sentence structure, but the content is just bizarre. And AI does this horrible thing of being so affirmative to anybody who talks. Like, you were like, oh, you put in something, and it's like, wow, that's a great, interesting idea. So it's the way that this could be a whole nother thing I'm saying right at the end of the episode, but the way that AI feeds into narcissism is like gonna be a problem, because you have these narcissists who have these like grand delusional ideas, and then you have AI, a very intelligent, resourceful, somewhat seeming sentient being, repeating back to you like, wow, this is so profound, this is really great, yeah, you're really onto something here, because it's like programmed to be the most like affirmational thing you've ever met in your entire life. And yeah, you're 100% going to get these delusional prophets creating delusional content with their narcissistic sort of narratives. And they're going to get better at it, because ChatGPT is going to be really good at helping them.
Absolutely. It's some scary stuff. I've toyed with it for a variety of different things that I've got going on technology-wise, and it's a birthday cake with a hand grenade in it.
Right.
That's the best way I can describe it. I started using it. I have trouble because I multitask heavily, and so I'll type out this big article, and sometimes I'll have it proofread it, and it does a good job at getting the grammar correct. But if you don't read what it has given you back, there's a hand grenade right there that's going to explode when people read it. So it's some scary stuff, and to think that is our future. Ministers are going to be using that, and not hand grenades, but theological nightmares are going to be embedded in their sermons now. This is a very scary thing. So much more we can talk about. I think we've got an hour now, and I've only covered just skimming the surface of all of the cons that I am aware that these guys can do. But I think it's enough that people get the picture. Whenever these guys want to toy with your head, they can do it.
They can, and the resources are only becoming more plentiful to do so. Yeah.
Absolutely, man. Well, this was incredible fun. Like I said, I have the unfortunate gift of thinking like this, but it helps in the research, because I can put myself into their shoes as I'm researching these guys and think, okay, if I was a bad guy, what would I do as a bad guy? And sure enough, half the time I figured out just by reading their environment and their scene and their setting and their scenario in their city.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for doing this. If you've enjoyed our show and you want more information, you can check us out on the web. You can find us at william-branham.org. For more about the dark side of the New Apostolic Reformation, you can read Weaponized Religion: From Christian Identity to the NAR, available on Amazon, Kindle, and Audible.